without any question, absolutely, one of the greatest moments of my childhood was my family's road trip to the World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, Queens, New York. So in the Vanek. The very fact that we were doing anything fun was actually itself novel. But for me, the destination was like a ticket to the Garden of Eden. We drove off in our brown Studebaker Lark station wagon. Just by a show of hands, has anyone ever been in a family that owned a Studebaker? Anybody? Okay, we got 1, 2 Studebakers. Any Studebakers on that? Okay, so there's actually some people that know what the heck I'm talking about. They went bankrupt. Anyway, got in the car. I had already been so obsessed with the World's Fair. I was cutting out pictures from Life magazine, cutting out articles from Look magazine and Saturday Evening Post, all those things that don't exist anymore. And also, I had a subscription to the National Geographic magazine. And as opposed to any of the other magazines I mentioned, I was forbidden to have a pair of scissors touch a National Geographic. I'm not quite sure what the deal was, but it was a holy book in my family and arrived every month. Great pictures, great articles. It was truly phenomenal. So I was already ready. I had pictures of the Hall of Science and the Unisphere, the model for the whole fair, the Magic Skyway, and again, those of you in my age category, I'm going to ask you right now, this is 1964, World's Fair, what was the food of all foods that everybody was talking about? Do you remember what it was? What was it? Belgian waffles. Give that man a Belgian waffle. It was as if somehow the world had brought to New York City, can you believe this, something they'd never seen before, culinarily speaking. Seems impossible. The Belgian waffle. I have no idea what else Belgium is famous for. Diamonds. But besides that, the waffle. That was everything. And so that was on my list. I was 10 years old, and for those of you who've ever raised boys, or if you've been a boy, you know age 10 is the best age because we're old enough to ask really good, sophisticated questions, but we're young enough to still be able to maybe snuggle a little bit, to be able to ask, to get a glass of water going to bed. The best year, it's before the ravages of adolescence takes over. And really, if I had attended the World's Fair at age 11, it would have been all different. Because I would have been like, this is not cool. And my sisters would have been there, which have made it really, I wouldn't have thought that was cool at all. But age 10, I didn't care. I was just glad I was there. Belgian waffles, man. So we pulled into this massive, we'd never been to any of these huge parks like Disneyland. So the parking lot was this massive parking lot and shuttles going back and forth, throngs of people walking in every which direction. And there were exhibits from nations all over the world. In fact, there's a kind of interesting little story about how the Jordanian pavilion got into fights with the Israel-America pavilion. Even back then, they were doing that with pavilions. The Vatican had a pavilion. They had the Pieta there. Billy Graham had a pavilion. It's a Small World was set up to begin its first showing at the World's Fair. There was even a log flume. Who knew? And of course, they were all the corporate sponsors. Anything from NCR, which stands for National Cash Register. I don't even know if they still exist or got bought by somebody else. Bell Labs, IBM. There was a General Cigar Pavilion, which we didn't go into, and General Motors, among others. Over 140 distinct attractions were sprinkled across this fairgrounds. And I wanted to go to each one. I think I was slack-jawed most of the day, except when I was chewing on my Belgian waffle. How could I know 10-year-old boy so enraptured that I would discover two truths of great significance that day. Well, the first encounter was at the Travelers Insurance Pavilion. It was, so those of you who know anything about it, their symbol, their logo is a big red umbrella. And so when you walk towards it, it looked like a big red umbrella floating on water. It was very impressive. And it was so awe-inspiring. Travelers Insurance, awe-inspiring. We entered through this long hall. We were then carefully engineered into groups of 60 and then taken on a walk across 13 different dioramas depicting Travelers Insurance's take on human history. In the words of Dr. Harry Shapiro, of all people, the exhibit's official coordinator, he said as follows: "This experience is titled The Triumph of Man. It will tell in 13 carefully selected episodes the progress of man from his earliest known beginnings over 1 million years ago up to the present. Each scene in the sequence will illustrate the significant steps man has made in his journey from an ape-like creature to his present state." What did I know about corporate boosterism? What did I know about florid exaggeration? As we walked from one tableau to the next, I grew more and more fascinated by the breadth of human experience. We saw everything from the discovery of fire, the origin of art, the beginnings of agriculture, Black Death, Age of Exploration, the American Civil War, and where did we end? In the stars, on the way to the moon. And I was just awestruck. The message was so inspiring to me. Things were going to get better every day. As John Lennon and Paul McCartney once wrote, "It's getting better all the time." I was sold. I got it. We're on a remarkable trajectory to the future, and I was going to be there for all of it. This reality was really indeed the triumph of man. But that only turned out to be one half of my experience. The other half, as if it was built to be this way, we schlepped across the fairgrounds. It was a big fairgrounds. All the way from Travelers Insurance. And if I had, I would have bought $1 million worth of Travelers Insurance just because I was so impressed. We crossed the fairgrounds. I got to the other side. And there, the largest pavilion on the entire campus of the World's Fair, General Motors. Well, the GM experience commences as you slip into these moving seats. And as they go by dioramas too. But while the dioramas in Travelers were static, like the ones at the Museum of Modern History, at the Museum of History in New York, these were models that moved. Now, of course, when I look at them now, because you can go on YouTube and see them, it is so rudimentary and hokey. I mean, you look at it's kind of like those of you who watched cartoons in the old days, a Clutch Cargo. You know, everything seemed very stiff and puppet-like. But didn't seem that way in 1964. There was a jungle. And in that jungle, there was a massive machine that felled towering trees with searing laser light. A road builder, scaled to appear 5 stories high and longer than 3 football fields, followed the timber cutter. It leveled and graded everything in its path, leaving a divided multi-lane superhighway in its path, which was their idea of the future for what to do to the Amazon. Well, seen through 10-year-old eyes, couldn't believe it. In 2064, there will be underwater hotels with beautiful vistas of sea creatures and coral reefs. There'll be an active commercial site in Antarctica. There's a city with moving sidewalks and endless ribbons of highway, tall skyscrapers, and access to business and retail. And of course, human settlement on the moon. Imagine the dioramic scenes in this pavilion. Humans building shelters and greenhouses, driving slinky lunar modules. I think I held my breath through the entire presentation. I was so taken with these exhibits, so transfixed by the vision. Amazingly, life would unfold just as the Traveler's Insurance exhibit said it would. What was the proof? The GM exhibit on the other side. It was going to be wonderful. We would be the winners, conquering outer space as well as the most unreachable parts of planet Earth. Or, to quote the narrator in the Traveler's Experience, I wish I had a voice to do what this narration was. Within this structure is a dioramic portrayal of man's struggle and growth against untold odds to reach his stature of today. It begins in prehistoric times more than 2 billion years ago and shows his progress through centuries upon centuries to the present. There were perils, but each time he survived them. Each time he grew to a higher level of betterment. This is the story of the triumph of man. Not only did I love it, I believed it, completely believed it. Such is the life of an American boy who held on to the hope as long as he could. And I was not, of course, alone. There were millions in my generation that held on to that. Donald Fagen is 6 years younger than I am. But he created a classic album called The Nightfly in 1982. One of his songs was a song called IGY, short for International Geophysical Year, which was a scientific program that took place in the late 50s. And he wrote a song about that, and it's not meant to be sarcastic or satirical. I really think it was his image. It totally goes with this. It goes, standing tough under stars and stripes, we can tell this dream's in sight. You've got to admit it at this point in time that it's clear the future looks bright. On that train of graphite and glitter, undersea by rail, 90 minutes from New York to Paris, well, by 76 will be A-OK. What a beautiful world this will be. What a glorious time to be free. Get your ticket to that wheel in space while there's time. The fix is in. You'll be a witness to that game of chance in the sky. You know we've got to win. Here at home, we'll play in the city, powered by the sun. Perfect weather for a streamlined world. There'll be spandex jackets, one for everyone. Such enthusiasm. I love that. He knew it. Totally intoxicating. I mean, spandex jackets for everyone? Oh my God, fantastic. That could really happen. That could really happen. And there I was 6 years later, so sure the promise made by two major multinational corporations would be fulfilled, that I would inherit a streamlined world. Well, it's been 60 years since I got off that ride, 6 decades since a 10-year-old American boy was inspired by the assurance that he got at the fair where the motto of the 1964 World's Fair was, the future through understanding. But we're all asking the same question. Where did it all go? Why does it feel so bad? Where have the promises of progress and amity disappeared to? What went so terribly and fatally wrong? I wish I knew the answer to these difficult questions. Some of it has to do with simple honesty versus hypocrisy. So 64 World's Fair, think about American history. JFK had been assassinated the year before. Civil rights movement was deep in its active stage. There are social critics now who call the World's Fair the end of innocence. Here was a mega event celebrating progress and affirmation and social cohesiveness. Robert Moses, the infamous urban planner of mid-century New York, was a terrible racist. He was largely responsible for the fair. He saw to it that not one black person would be hired for any job on the fair site. Not one minority contractor would be hired. Proud southern states built pavilions celebrating their unique contributions to American culture, yet they still had Jim Crow laws on their books. World's Fair organizers lied and broke promises to various builders and made special deals to give certain corporations preferred locations. The fair also underperformed financially and in the end was more than $20 million in the hole. $20 million, 1964, $20 million. Maybe the fair didn't see the future at all, but was propagating a fantastical, corrupt hallucination. I mean, look, I'm glad I didn't know any of this at the time. I appreciate having been able to hold on to my naivete just long enough to reach Vietnam. But there's no way to hold on to those delusions today. It would be childish and more than a little disingenuous to claim that we're on the right track to tomorrow. We're not heading to the moon to build fancy dormitories. There's no hotels being planned for 500 feet under the surface of the sea. As the song says, there's nowhere to run and there's nowhere to hide. What are we to do with this realization? I think it's kind of obvious now when our kids look at, and grandkids look into the future. They don't see enormous progress on the horizon. They see global warming. They see the rise of fascism. They see a nation split down the middle. They see an embattled Israel. They experience anti-Semitism. They experience hostility on their college campuses. They feel the chill of a darkness as they look towards the future. Times like these, I realize how lucky I am to be a Jew, to be connected to the Jewish people through time. Look at our experiences for the generations of our people. We've been expelled from every major European nation. We have been the target of enormous abuse and hatred. People have wished us dead and gone for centuries, and yet we are still here. Our own great-great-great-grandparents experienced this firsthand. In the 1880s, Tsar Alexander III, may his name be cursed, had a plan for the future of the Jews. This was the plan. A third of the Jews of Russia would starve. A third would convert to Christianity, Russian Orthodoxy, and a third would leave the country altogether. We suffered deeply during that period. But instead of succumbing to Jew hatred as statecraft, we responded by reaching for meaning, for community, all the while aware of our plight. Jewish intellectuals who had been counting on assimilation, the way it would resolve the situation of the Jews, began to rethink their assumptions. Some Jews opted to join a growing movement called Zionism, claiming the future was a return to our native homeland. Yet others adopted a program of Jewish self-defense and organization. We could not be passive in the face of loss and pain and persecution. Jews rarely had an encouraging trajectory as we looked into the future, but we did not stop. We didn't give up. How could we? Now, I don't want to present a two-dimensional argument here. Yes, of course there were Jews throughout our history who gave up, who changed their names and fled their Jewish identities. They converted, some of them informed on their Jewish brothers and sisters. They checked out and left the rest of us behind. And we fought, and we fight amongst each other all the time. We've had tremendous ideological and theological conflicts. Jews have set up their opponents for notice by the authorities and had them arrested or even deported. But ultimately, most of us and our ancestors have not surrendered their Jewish lives in the face of terror or fear or expediency. Have you ever wondered why? Why are we still here? Why did your grandparents or your great-grandparents before them, what did they think was so important about being Jewish that they would not give up? That they would keep their Jewish selfhood intact, as dangerous as it might be, so that you could one day be sitting in a suburban city free to worship, to make a living, to live where you wanted to be. What motivates us to keep on keeping on? Jews have always understood that we are not owed anything. In fact, quite the contrary. We've assumed for 2 millennia that nothing would come to us unless we worked for it to the point of exhaustion. It's that Jewish inclination to act at all costs, the mysterious engine that never stalls or quits, the stubborn belief that we are more than just ourselves and how we spend our money or consume our entertainments. Being Jewish cannot bear the fruit of a next generation if we don't work at it all the time. We are constantly trying to educate and elucidate, illuminate the Jewish path into the future. And I know this path is not bordered by roses. There are obstacles and disadvantages. There are haters and defamers. There are temptations to leave, to depart the path. But this Jewish path is all about meaning and substance. It is a path that leads to a sense of connection, something deeper and more lasting than all the alternatives, all the competing ideologies, systems. Many of you have looked for it in the secular world, but the elements remain separate. I'm not sure that I understand it all myself. It remains a mystery, a thrilling mystery, but a mystery that contains reassurance and certainty. It is our path, one that makes no false promises, but takes us forward all the same. And the great propulsive force at our backs is something so elemental we take it for granted. It's the design of our literature, the template of our civilization, that however much we might stumble into failure, God will find us in the desert and admit us to wholeness. The God of Jews allows us the blessing of hope. Atonement is possible. Tshuva shimmers in the distance. Second star to the right and straight on till morning. There is no sin so fatal that it requires supernatural intervention. This is our hope. This is the Jewish hope. Not a naive expectation of flying cars, but a sense that God wants for us to do what's necessary and right. Hope, above all, is a state of mind. It is a dimension of our neshama, our soul, our innermost soul. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that it is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons in our history, in our illumined path of meaning. As Václav Havel, Czech Republic, once wrote while he was in prison, he said, hope in this deep and powerful sense is not complacent certainty that things will get better, or a commitment to shallow enterprises and easy success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is necessary, not because it stands a chance to succeed. The more unpropitious the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper and more honorable the hope itself. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worthy of our efforts, regardless of how it turns out in the end. My World's Fair dreams of the future from 60 years ago have faded. No undersea hotel, no moon colonization, no jetpack waiting for me in my office. The whole of that dream disappeared forever, replaced by the war in Ukraine, the melting of glaciers, the unfortunate certainty that COVID could be contained but not defeated, watching missiles fall on Israel, watching innocents die by the thousands, The problems of our planet are multitudinous and complicated. The pathways we imagine have collapsed in dead ends. But my Jewish dream, our Jewish dream keeps going. We keep reaching out for more. That we are still here, strong and fractious as ever, is part miracle, but also part determination. We must keep hoping. We can't stop believing in ourselves and how we make meaning through acts of service and love and integrity. The eternal light behind me illumines the path to this deepest truth for us to embrace. This and every fresh new year. Kol od belevav panima, odlo avda tikvatenu. We are the ones who keep hope alive.